Are you ready for change?
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
You're listening to the Mr. Change Agent podcast with your host, Ron Ovitt, pastor, recovery coach, author, and pastoral counselor, and creator of Emotional Relearning. We have embarked on a series talking about anxiety and worry. And I know a lot of us deal with those issues. A lot of listeners are dealing with those issues. And it's a scary subject. I know a lot of people with anxiety and worry, they don't like to talk about it. It's like, don't bother me with it. I don't want to talk about it. I'm too upset. Who can you trust? But I think by now, if you've been listening to this podcast long enough, you know Ron well enough. I think you trust him. You can tell by the stories he shares, the experiences he's had, that he's sincere and that changing lives is what he's all about, because he represents a God that changes lives. And he's been through a lot of this himself, and he shares that openly. So even if you don't want to talk about it, I'd ask you to listen to it today. Listen to it this first time, then perhaps listen to it again, and then share it with others. I hope, and our thoughts are that you would join us for this next 15-20 minutes, and let's see if we can change some lives and if we can focus on our anxiety and worry. And Ron, with that, you talked about that last time. But can you go into a little more depth? I think there's a lot of people here that want to hear more. You started talking about how the brain works, and I think the last thing anyone with anxiety and fear wants to face is that, number one, they're alone, or that they're weird and unique. Mm-hmm. And I think I've sensed through what you're talking is that you're not alone, and it's not weird and unique, and you're explaining some of the thought behind it, how it happens, why it happens. Ron, just take it over, and why don't you talk some more from your heart about anxiety on this, the Mr. Change Agent podcast.
Well, anxiety is something I lived with all my life. Even when I started ministry at 20 years old, I carried it on. When I was young, I had it. I had different times when I'd dissociate and faint, and I'd have things that I was scared about. And I really tried. And that's probably why I gravitated towards psychology. I was looking for some answers. I had found faith, and that was a great help to me. And so combining psychology and faith has always been my life's ambition, where I could help others. And I know what it's like to, as you get older and you feel anxious all the time, you do feel like, well, what's wrong? And for me, I was always afraid that someone would find something terribly wrong with me, and I'd be put away or locked away, or and it was outrageous, the kind of fear I had. But, through the things that we teach here and other things, I was able to overcome this and work through those kind of things. So let me just kind of go into a little bit about anxiety and worry again. And I want you to, if it starts to bother you, just, take a nice, not a quick breath, but a nice, let it out. And then just take a nice breath in. Hold it, and then let it out, and just stick with it here. Put it on, relax. And so let's talk. First, there's normal anxiety, and that protects us from danger. I mean, it works with our alarm system to protect us. We're careful walking across the street. Don't take candy from a stranger, right? We were always taught that one. The trouble comes in when we don't want to cross the street. I worked with someone that was so afraid they didn't want to cross the street. They stayed home. And there was different reasons for that, but it became big pervasive fear, right? And then there's heightened anxiety. And that's the form of dread, terror, unthinkable consequences. These have their roots in our childhood trauma. Now, unfortunately, as a child, we didn't have the wherewithal to protect ourselves and find a solution. So because of the trauma, these awfulized beliefs stay with us. What starts to be in a sensitive awareness, careful swimming in the deep, wash your hands before you eat, don't stay out after dark. If surrounded by traumatic events, in a child's mind can become heightened to a dysfunctional level. I got to the place where, I was afraid to go in the water. Why? Because our mother was afraid to go into the water. She had been burned when she was a child, never learned to swim. And it wasn't that she was so freaked out about it, but somewhere I picked up that. And I'll never forget, even when I was older, and my one son must have been around 11, maybe 12, he'd be in the bathroom, right? And I was always worried when they're in there by themselves in the tub, afraid they're going to drown, right? And so I remember he was in there, and it was what I thought was longer than it should be. So I knocked on the door, and he didn't answer. So I knocked again, he didn't answer. So I opened the door, kind of shoved the door open, right? Went in there, and the curtains were closed. I put the curtains back, and he was underwater. So I grabbed him, but the only thing I could is hair. He had long hair, and he goes, "Whoa, what?" You know, and he had been underwater trying to see how long he could hold his breath. Well, but see, that was way beyond a regular fear of don't get drowned in the water, right? And yet that carried with me. See, from childhood, I carried it on, even into adulthood. So I had to, work on that. And so there's a heightened anxiety. And it can start sometimes as a sensitive awareness, but it grows out of proportion. So what does a child do when a trauma comes? They run or they hide, they fight, flight. Now, what worked for me in the water when I was younger, as far as my own personal fear of water, is that I decided I would start learning to swim by walking in the water, pushing myself up and seeing if I could float, and kind of self-teaching. And so later, of course, decades later, whatever, I found out that was systematic desensitization, and I started doing that with a lot of my phobias, a lot of my fears. And so a lot of times we can do that. We can retrain ourselves. Some of the kind of heightened anxiety would be phobias, obsessive-compulsive disorder, social anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. And then there's worry. So as we grow, we don't want to face the dread, so we continue to cope, and this coping is what we call worry. It usually consider a more generalized anxiety. Worry is our way of protecting us from anxiety, but it doesn't solve the problem. It perpetuates the abnormal anxiety. Worry is a defense mechanism. It's a way to keep from the impending dread. However, worry becomes an obsessive chronic condition, and millions of people worry all the time. It robs us of our joy. Worry is a thief. And we need to remember that the majority of things that we don't worry about will never happen. And I had to fight that. And remember, and sometimes I would just say, okay, I'm not going to worry about it today. I'm going to trust God. I'm going to, if it's still that important, I'll think about it Monday, and I'd take the weekend off, if I could. And I'd learn, because see, here's what's important. Some of it comes from cognitive, things that we believe. Others comes from the amygdala. And the amygdala has been trained to react. We see triggers and it reacts. And the thing is, we can't train our amygdala by talking to it. We can't go, hey, you, listen. What are you doing? Stop it. Will you just stop it? It doesn't hear us. Instead, it learns from experience. The way we retrain our amygdala is by not worrying, by having a period of time when that trigger didn't offend us, when it didn't scare us. And that's chalk up 1 for the good guys, right? Mm-hmm. Then it happens again, chalk up 2. And pretty soon that prefrontal cortex works together. I'll give you an example. I was scared to go to the basement, right? And it's dark down there. And so Dad decided, to take me down there. Look, I'll show you. There's nothing there. And so he took me by the hand and walked me through the basement. And that was great, but even as a young kid, I said to myself, I remember saying, well, sure, there's no monster going to come out when you're here. No monster was going to face my dad. It's when I'm down there by myself, right? One time I go down there, and this is after a while now. I'm older now, and I still got some roots of these, and I'm retraining myself to overcome these things. It's a process. One time I'll never forget, I go down there and I know it was someone. I saw it. And see, the amygdala works faster than the prefrontal cortex. It works in milliseconds. So all of a sudden my alarm's off, but I was training myself not to just run. Stay there. Well, soon my eyes caught that it was a silhouette of my mother's dress hanging on a rod. And so the prefrontal cortex then came in and said, okay, calm down. But a lot of times we don't give ourselves that chance. Saying, oh, there's nothing down there, it wouldn't have done a thing. I had to prove it to myself. And so by waiting a little longer, allowing that prefrontal cortex to make an assessment, not just reacting, they worked together. And that's one of the things we can start doing is allowing ourselves enough time. Wait for it, deep breathe, relax, wait for it, and let your prefrontal cortex start analyzing and see if you can't come to a better solution and find out why you're worrying. And so that's one thing that really helped me. Now, worry often disguises itself as control, but in actuality, it can be manifested as people-pleasing, perfectionism, procrastination, superstitions. These are things that really are forms of worrying. It becomes this continuous stress. So what are some hallmarks of worry and anxiety? Well, predicting danger, awfulizing outcomes, hyper-control over circumstances, and avoidance or escapes. And one way to overcome it is to know that you're doing this. And here again, calm the amygdala down, breathe, relax. You're aware that you're, for example, predicting danger. Now relax, hang in there, don't panic. Ask yourself some questions. Okay, analyze it. You're giving yourself time now to get that prefrontal cortex involved. And you're starting to figure out. And the longer you wait, of course, the amygdala is learning, well, maybe there isn't any danger here. And so you soon find that panic will start to dissipate and you'll start to think more rationally.
Okay, let me say this then. So you're talking about the irrational fears that we have. I mean, everything's perfectly fine with being vigilant, aware of our circumstances, don't put your hand in the fire, those kinds of things. So if there's legitimate danger, Will Robinson, stay away from it. But you're talking about those things that haven't even happened yet, and we assume it's going to be that way. We're afraid of it before we even get there. We dread about it, and it's become this hidden monster that we really haven't ever defined. We just think it's there all the time. And you're saying face those. You're saying look at the reality of those and let your brain really analyze it and quit reacting. Is this what you're talking about? Slow down your reaction time?
Yes, yeah. When you're in the present moment, and here again, the best time to do that is after the fact. Here you've had an episode, go back, relax, breathe, think through it. What just happened? Just happened?
That's good. That's good advice. So it just happened. You just had a little bit of a panic attack, or you're worried about something and you didn't do something because you were too afraid. Then you sit there and say, okay, what just happened? Why didn't I do that? What's really
Start
going
analyzing. Now that's hard to do because usually we berate ourselves. Usually we go into all kinds of, God, I can't believe it. We start shaming ourselves and we start, everything else. If we're, we'll find some way to escape. If chemistry happens to be our way to escape, we'll go get drunk or we'll do, so it's better if we say, doggone, I shouldn't have done that. What happened? And we can start to analyze. And what I like to do sometimes is relive it. I call it relive. There's pre-live and relive. Pre-live is before something, rehearse, see what it feels like, feel what your body's going to react and picture yourself overcoming it. Yeah, it's being proactive. Yeah. The other way is to relive it and and this time, what would it feel like if you waited on that and you actually did it, and so it's this kind of systematic desensitization where, sort of like you would with a snake phobia, right? You don't just throw your hand in a snake pit, you think about it first, sweat bullets, then you look at a picture for a second, sweat bullets, and then you say that you're going to go to the biology department, sweat bullets, then you go to the school and you're really sweating, then you go down the hallway and you're sweating, next you go to the door, then you step in the door, then you go within 50 feet of the case, then you go 10, then you go to the top of the case, then you pull the top off, you're really sweating. Then you put your hand in and out, and then you put it in, and then you touch the snake, So, these are over a period of time.
And you're talking about a non-dangerous snake.
Well, of course, yeah, right.
No.
Obviously, fear of spiders would be similar, non-poisonous spiders. You wouldn't play with a black widow, So, but these systematic desensitization is a lot of ways that you can get rid of some of those fears. And in a sense, that's what you're doing here. Okay, what just happened? And so, what we want to do, and we can do this in the next one, is talk about more specific ways that we can overcome some of this worry about predicting danger, awfulizing outcomes, hyper control of our circumstances. And here's the thing, worry is a habit. That started setting me free. When I realized it was a habit, I thought, well, gee, maybe I can develop another habit. Anxiety is a habit. The other thing, it's addictive. It can become our normal. We can get used to it. It feeds us, Have you ever met a victim? Someone that's just a chronic victim? Oh, my goodness. It's hard to talk to them. It's hard to get them out of that victim role because there's gain. And sometimes we need to ask ourselves, what are we gaining? Even from anxiety, what are we gaining? And comes a period of time when we can gain things from our anxiety. We don't have to face things. It's an excuse maybe for not doing something. It gets a little more complicated than that, but I think our listeners know what I'm talking about. What am I gaining from this? Is there something I'm gaining? And are there other ways to gain that? And so we'll talk more at the next podcast about some ways to overcome this.
This is a lot to digest, Ron, and this is fantastic. It's really, really something. I'm sitting here just as manning the microphone and such, and just mesmerized by all of this information, and I'm sure the audience is as well. So, look, there's a lot of material Ron's put out, and you need to be aware of it. And you can go to YouTube, and there's 2 YouTube channels you should look up. One is called Mr. Change Agent. And you just basically type that in, Mr. Change Agent, and then an icon will come up. And you go ahead and click on that, and you'll be right to the page. And you'll see all types of videos and audios that you can watch and listen to and systematically go through and learn a lot about yourself and how the brain works and just fantastic stuff. And also empowerforliving.com, empowerforliving.com/resources. And that will show you a lot of material. And then the books he has on Amazon, just type in Ronald Ovitt, O-V-I-T-T, and you'll see the myriad of books that he has there too. So thank you for joining us. Make sure that you like this. Make sure that you subscribe, tell others about it, and join us next time for another Mr. Change Agent podcast.